It's my pleasure to introduce and welcome Travis Howerton to the stage for a look at how RightPath capabilities fit within the scope of NNSA's 2NV initiative. Travis is the Chief Technology Officer at the National Nuclear Security Administration and Program Manager for RightPath. Please join me in giving Travis a warm welcome.
All right, so first off, thanks for having me out here and for the opportunity to talk to all you guys. We're going to go through, now that Bob's laid down the vision, we're going to go through some of why we're doing each particular thing that we're doing, transitioning a little later in Anil's talk into how we're doing each thing, so you kind of get the full spectrum of the vision, the what, the how, and how it all comes together at a level of detail we've frankly never shared with anybody before in a public venue. So we appreciate the opportunity for AFCEA to really lay out this level of detail with all of you here, and we're excited to tell you a little more. So on the government side, doing the kind of stuff Bob's talking about isn't easy. There's a lot of people who want to help and get involved in ways that are completely unhelpful, right? And so there's a lot of bureaucracy you have to navigate. To get anything really, truly transformative done, it just takes a lot of work. And so RightPath really is our vehicle to help streamline that process. And really, from my perspective, we stand right on the forefront of a wave of technology that's going to change everything. So, and I came from a time where when I was in college, I started off as a Chem E major. This thing called the internet came along, and I flipped from moles to middleware overnight. I said, I'm going to ride that bandwagon. And 15 years later, still happy I'm there. What's happening today, same set of trends, but there is not one this time. It's not the internet. It's four things. It's cloud computing, mobility, social computing, and big data and analytics. All four of those things are combining to create the new 21st century IT toolbox. If you're solving problems the way you used to solve them, you're missing the point. You have to put together all these capabilities as part of your core architecture as a way you tackle business problems going forward. Fighting those battles the same way is a sub-optimized way of doing business. And so we're going to talk about how we're putting together all these things and what we think is a really transformative architecture that will allow us to take on challenges that were impossible before and more efficient than ever before. And again, it comes back to people, process, and technology. The people side is the toughest thing in government. We didn't necessarily come up with, most of our senior executives didn't come up with a huge IT skill set. They're very familiar with email, they're very familiar with a telephone. The whole idea of why anybody would want to be on a social network baffles most of them. There's one particular case where we rolled out webcams where somebody, no kidding, thought there was somebody on the other end of it watching what he was doing. Right? And truly freaked out. You would have thought there was a hornet's nest above his head. So there are just little things in government that you just don't see coming. And so you've really got to focus on the people. You've got to focus on what's your policy framework to enable some of these things, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Bob already hit on the three pieces. I'm going to fly through some of the high-level stuff because Bob's hit it, and Anil's going to hit it in great depth. That there's three capabilities that we're rolling out. One voice powered by your cloud over the OneNSA network, improving the way we communicate, hosting it in an efficient environment, and then building a new wide area network to connect it all together creates the foundation for how we're going to transform our enterprise going forward. This is the core infrastructure investment that is necessary to fundamentally deliver new capabilities. To get that done in the time frames and the minimal dollar values we're giving, we're not in a huge budget world. There's nobody where you're going to be able to go to and say, I need $100 million in 10 years, and you won't believe how awesome this is. Those days aren't happening anymore. We're doing more with less. We're being efficient stewards of the taxpayer dollars. We're going to do all of that in 9 months from money showing up. We're taking it out of existing operating dollars. We're not going back asking for more money. To do that, you really need an awesome team. And so I'm very privileged to work with an outstanding group of people. Anil Carmel's our lead architect, next level smart guy. Anything you try to figure out, this impossible challenge, you give it to him, say, oh yeah, I figured that out over lunch, here it is. And he redefines a business model. I mean, just crazy smart guy. On that side, it doesn't help to have a guy like Anil if you don't have a cyber program that will secure what he's doing. So Anil can say, to the cloud, and cyber will say, slow down, right? This is government, scale back your expectations, right? So you've got to have cyber people who are just as excited about what we're doing. And so we're privileged to work with Mary Helen Hitson, who's really leading that charge. Chris is here speaking for that team, another really smart guy, very forward thinking, and I think equally as excited as the rest of the team to move us forward. On the operations side, you don't want to build something you can't sustain. Part of our partnership with DOE is Robbie Green. That group is looking at how do we take that capability that's developed and funded by NNSA, make it available more broadly and sustain it into the future. So we've got a group looking at that. And then policy and partnerships. Pete Saronis, really smart guy leading up the policy team, making sure that these technologies we deploy, we have a good policy base of how you do cloud computing, mobility, and others, and we'll talk through some of that. And so what are some of the value-added services you get out of RightPath? Just out of the box, just doing some simple things with RightPath. We're agile and lean. And some of the things we do is we have transparency tools. You can actually go into our portal, see what we're doing, where we're at, simple things that you have in project controls. We're essentially non-existent on our side, so we put those in place. We can look across the portfolio and look for areas where we have redundancy and eliminate it. We've got a base architecture we can build off of going forward versus siloed architectures. We're building that core infrastructure, that highly leverageable set of capabilities. And we are reinventing policy in ways that we think are truly innovative across the domain. And it's important to make sure before you get started on any kind of endeavor like this, you understand the end game. So Bob hit that one. You've got to have a strategy and a vision of where you're going, how it all fits together, that you can align everybody to. So this is a high-level chart that talks about how all these pieces come together. It starts with RightPath at the top, which is agile and lean. You know, agile is all the rage in industry, but if all you are is agile, you can be sub-optimized. Making stupid efficient is not anything to brag about. Right? So if we can start by re-architecting our processes and then automating those to make them even more efficient, you'll end up in a better place. You need to make sure that everything you're doing starts with cybersecurity in mind. We're entrusted with the safety, security, and reliability of the U.S. nuclear weapons stockpile. We take security very, very seriously. So we want to make sure we know our users. We have a high degree of assurance of who they are, both on the physical and the logical side. So we're making heavy investments in identity management. 2NV, the NSA network vision, is really our transformation piece. Those are the three key initiatives that are ongoing today. JC3 is a Joint Cyber Coordination Center. It's a sort of SOC, NOC type setup, making sure that we understand our environment, both operationally and from a security perspective. The key trick, I think, is the Cyber Sciences Lab, because we are very different than any other government organization. We all think we're special, but I think in our case, we're actually special in one very unique way. Our information doesn't declassify. You will never go to Wikipedia and find an NNSA weapons design on it. Not going to happen. Not 50 years from now, not 100 years from now. It doesn't declassify. So we're worried about threats, not today, not tomorrow, but 25 years down the road. So we are looking at next generation cyber defense, partner with national labs, academia, and industry to solve problems that haven't even been invented yet. So we think that's a very unique capability we bring to the table that's integrated across our entire set. So that as we invent new capabilities using our labs, which really are national treasures, they reinvent the art of the possible every day. We can roll that through JC3 into our architecture and our operating environment so it makes a real difference tactically in our current environment. Underpinning all that is sustain it, making sure that we optimize our infrastructure investments. Because we are part of the broader Department of Energy, we really have a core mission around being not only good stewards of the taxpayer dollars, which is everybody's mission, but also being good stewards of energy. So we built some really slick tools, and Neil will go into those in more depth, about how we can monitor in real time our energy consumption, optimize it, and set a benchmark for others to emulate going forward. And we think when you put all these things together, it will really enable V-Force 21, which Bob hit on and I'll talk about a little more later, which what it's going to enable is work is something you do, not somewhere you go. That's the end game of what we're trying to do. The phrase Bob Breeze, who's in the DOE CIO's office, has coined, that really resonates with me. That's the fundamental culture change that all of this is going to make in the end. High-level technology overview, and Anil will have the details, but this is really kind of what it looks like. At the top, we have users, any device, anywhere, anytime, coming through a wired or wireless infrastructure over a new wide area network. We're federated. We celebrate diversity. This is not a cookie cutter approach to IT where we're going to Borg and assimilate everyone. This is a federated approach where we are celebrating our diversity, keeping that innovation alive in our labs, while leveraging a common compute platform where we can have an extension of our existing organizational network that gives agility, that gives security, and that gives flexibility to the labs that they have today across a shared compute platform that's more secure and cheaper than what any of us could do alone. So we think that's a neat trick. We give everybody the autonomy they have today. Everybody gets a trophy. Nobody's the big winner that everybody has to salute the flag to, while giving everybody a lower cost infrastructure so that they can move money out of their operational budgets and into their mission budgets where it'll really make a difference in the field. On the left, we got to make sure that we manage and operate all of that, and there's a bunch of controls that go around with that. So when are we planning to deploy some of this? Right now, at this minute, we're finalizing the budget, getting that moved over so that we can kick off work and get that scaled out. The initial operating capability for your cloud is in fall of 2012. The one NSA network, along with some of the identity management components that you'll see, is in winter of 2012. And then by spring, we'll be in full production on One Voice. And then next summer, full production of your cloud across all of our plants and labs. So we think this is a very ambitious schedule, given the scope that we have and the minimum dollar value we're using to go against that. So from the time we get our money to the time we're done is less than 12 months for a complete agency-wide transformation that foundationally changes how IT services are delivered and received. So what's your cloud? In a little more depth, it's an infrastructure as a service offering. So if you're familiar with the NIST models, we're on the bottom of the stack. It's based on the Los Alamos National Lab infrastructure on demand capability, which has really been in production for several years now. We are replatforming to version 3 to take infrastructure on demand, IOD, and make it really the government's first cloud service broker. And the key to a cloud service broker concept for us is, again, it celebrates our diversity. Nobody's in charge. Really what we are doing is brokering services across multiple providers to where, think of it like a travel site, kayak.com or expedia.com. You say, I need to go from A to B in these sorts of time frames at these sorts of parameters, and it goes and finds all the available services that will meet the parameters you specified. We are inventing the same tech for cloud computing. So underneath it, you can have multiple providers, on-prem or commercial cloud providers, and you can broker those services across all of our customer base without anyone running it, if you will. So we think the broker concept is transformational for us, and is really the game-changing tech that enables cloud computing in a federated model. We're going to have an east and west geographical distribution for COOP and DR perspective. And the trick is if you want anybody to use anything, you have to eliminate a pain point. And really there's two pain points here that we can eliminate. One is from the time you need a server, if you're a scientist wanting to do something, by the time you buy it, it comes in through procurement, gets a property tag, gets imaged, gets network pulled to it, racked and stacked. It's a month-long or multi-month process at most of our sites. With IOD, we take that process from months to minutes with no touch. So from the time you need something to the time you get it, we have researchers out pushing the boundaries of science instantly versus waiting months for corporate IT to get them that new box. That's a very real pain point. The other real pain point is cybersecurity. We take people who are world-class climate experts and say, go write a cyber plan. And they do a horrible, horrible job at it. And then the cyber people read it, and they say, this is total junk, and they send it back with lots of red ink. And by the time you're done, you spend a lot of money, both sides truly hate each other, and 6 months later, they finally get what they asked for after spending a whole bunch of money and wasting a whole bunch of time. Nobody likes it. So what we're doing here is a pick-a-plan approach. Pre-built enclaves, security baked into the architecture, you provision into the appropriate enclave based on that workload and what you're trying to do with it. So it's pick a plan versus write a plan. You can have it in minutes. That is a transformative capability. So some of those use cases, again, rapid provisioning. We can do energy monitoring across it as we move from a physical to a virtual environment. As we move into lower energy consumption, greener data centers, we can figure out as we consolidate our data centers exactly how much energy we are saving and portray that back over time. From a COOP DR perspective, it's baked in. You don't really have to worry about it. Even at our lowest tier of service, you get some basic COOP capabilities. You transition from CapEx to OpEx. So in the CFO side of the house, they love that kind of capability. It's easy to budget for and understand. And again, we segregate workloads into security enclaves based on common use cases. So again, you pick a plan instead of writing a plan. One NSA network. There's really nothing fancy about here from a tech stack. So if you're tech people, there's nothing here that's really going to blow you away. But we are still logically architected the same way we were physically built in the 1940s. So we were built, everybody was different physical locations, need to know, all those sorts of things. Fast forward 70 years later, our firewalls still look the same way. Everybody blocks everybody, nobody trusts anybody. We communicate by email or by telephone, and that's all you get. So what we're doing is putting a new wide area network in place that will allow a fuller suite of services to allow us to communicate in a modern way. There's also the identity management piece to this. So on the OneID side, that's a physical access control system improvements we're making, allowing us to foundationally redefine visitor. When I go to see Anil at Los Alamos, I'm not really a visitor. I'm an NNSA employee. It's an NNSA site, but I get treated as such. I go to the visitor center, I waste half an hour of my day. If there's a long line, I'm there even longer. And I do that every time, to every site I go to. So what we're doing is redefining visitor. If you've got your HSPD 12 PIV credential, you'll be able to seamlessly move between sites without interconnecting our sites. So that's a neat trick as well. Because we are the nuclear weapons program, we don't necessarily want all our systems interconnected and be able to move laterally between them. That is really not a good thing for us. So we've been able to solve that trick while maintaining our air gaps, solving the business problem, maintaining our security. Great thing for us. On the logical side, we're taking a similar approach that celebrates diversity. We're being able to take our existing access control systems, our logical access control systems, let you authenticate in a distributed manner, and then authorize centrally. Keeping the keys distributed, minimizing the impact to the existing systems, and really fast-tracking everything behind that to the right of that one-page chart. So another neat trick I think we've been able to design and pull off, leveraging, again, our national lab and industry partnerships to do something that's really kind of groundbreaking in that domain. One voice. This one is really the one that's going to make a difference in the end user's life. All those other things are great for the nerds. I love them. They get me excited. I love talking cloud computing. Could do it all day. Nobody on the customer side cares anything about cloud computing. They do want to be able to communicate better. Right? So being able to have a web conference, voice and video, instant messaging, email, all those sorts of things across our entire customer base, fundamentally changing the way we can collaborate is a big deal for us. In addition, presence is a big deal. Because we're not all located centrally, it's nice to know when someone's available across a geographically diverse infrastructure and be able to communicate seamlessly. So this is a big deal for us, something that there's enormous demand for in our customer base. that really requires those underlying capabilities from a network and infrastructure level of support. And that's a cool trick, but I mean, it's mostly a commoditized thing if you're talking unified comms in the private sector. The neat trick we're doing is we're integrating that with a business-focused, internally hosted social networking capability. So it's not enough just to give sort of synchronous communications, unified comms to people. The future is social computing. We are building the one voice social network across all of NNSA, allowing organic collaboration connecting scientist to scientist, researcher to researcher, headquarters to the field in a way that was never possible before. And if you think about it, this is game changing for us. So what do national labs do? They invent technology. They push the boundaries of science. And to do that, you need the smartest people in the world collaborating. The problem is you don't always know who the other smart people are. Right? So what the social network can do is bring together people that you don't even know you should know, but based on what you're working on, groups you're in, and other parameters, it can pull that intelligence together and say, look, you really need to meet this guy from Livermore who understands identity, because I see you're working on identity as well. Fusing things together, making connections, also capturing the knowledge as we are collaborating together for preservation's sake. So when our aging workforce retires, all that knowledge doesn't go with them. So we think social networks are transformative. They foundationally change, I think, how we'll collaborate and work in the future. And they move us past email, which I view as a weapon of mass distraction. So everybody's been in the office. You come in at 4:30, you're going to check one email. I got to respond to Bob. That's all I really got to do. And then I can go home and spend time with my family. But then you make the one mistake we all make. You check the other one. And then you check the next one. And then it's 7:30. You still haven't responded to Bob. Your dinner's cold. Right? You can't control who talks to you. Right? The beauty of the social network is that it's exclusive. Right? You only talk to me if I allow you in. The other thing is it's mostly anonymous. I get much less posts to me than I get to the stream. And because it's not to me, I don't feel the need to respond personally to it unless I'm interested and I have time. It's just a better way to work. Right? So we think this is a truly transformative capability. The other one is enterprise wireless. What we've got to get to is a mobile workforce. This is not a convenience thing, it is necessary. If you try to plug in your iPad into that wall socket through an Ethernet port, you're going to be there a while. Right? So you look at tech today, you've got to have a mobile strategy going forward, or you're really sub-optimizing what you're doing in the cloud and in other domains. So we're making huge infrastructure investments across our enterprise in mobility, and we think it's going to do several things for us. It's going to lower our operational costs. There are things that are just cheaper to do wireless versus wired. We think we can shorten design build time for weapon systems by making investments in the classified wireless domain. There are studies out of Harvard that people would prefer to take their mobile devices in and use the device they want over arrays. I'm not in that camp, just since my boss is here, I'll take my raise. But there's a whole generation of people who are crazy, right? So you have to be able to support them, right? So the other thing we can do is we can reduce our safety and security risks. We can use sensor networks and all sorts of platforms to foundationally change the way we work. We did something called the Macro Baseline Benchmarking Study, and if you're thinking we have the worst names for studies ever, we do. But they found the number one thing we do wrong is we don't do strategic IT. We don't invest in IT the way a business would invest in IT. We don't have corporate systems, we don't consolidate, and by the way, this whole wireless thing isn't a fad, you might want to get on that. And they've laid out a whole bunch of business case related data about why we ought to be investing in these technologies to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars a year in potential savings within the NNSA by making these kinds of investments. So we are doing some really cutting edge stuff there. And it goes across a lot of things. It's not just 802.11. When most people think wireless, they think 802.11. It's bigger than that. It is much bigger than that. In particular for us, classified wireless. We recently accredited the US government's first classified Suite B sensor network. The first of its kind. No Type 1 using commercial technologies, NSA approved. Not much more I can say about it, and it's kind of foreign for obvious reasons, but groundbreaking, truly transformational stuff. Also, sensor networks. We make things. That's just what we do. And we have a lot of industrial complex. There's no reason in 2012 you need to send people on rounds to check gauges, especially in contaminated areas, potentially where there's special nuclear materials. So now we need 2 people, right? Dressed out. It's expensive. There's better ways to do that, leveraging sensor networks and wireless technologies, and we're making those investments, being wise stewards of taxpayer dollars. And finally, there's wide area campus networks. One of our facilities is bigger than at least one state in this country. Right? So there's really big areas we have where we do things in isolation, where 2 years after the time we decide we want to run an experiment, we can start because we had to go pull fiber 100 miles that way before we could get started. That is not the way to go. You can use wireless to really simplify a lot of that. And again, we want to be good stewards of our energy usage as well. So the Sustain It program, and Neil's going to unveil for the first time a little bit of what that looks like. But we're fusing into a single pane of glass a whole lot of operational insight about how you consume energy, leveraging some unique national laboratory capabilities that were developed within DOE for energy savings, and really making this, that information available for decision support system type things so we can be better stewards of our energy usage. On the policy side, you can't do any of that unless you've got a policy base that allows it. So if you say, I want to take my personal device into a security area, there's a whole bunch of policy that says that's not going to happen. Right? Without fundamental policy changes, most of this transformation just isn't possible. So we're doing things in cloud computing policy, mobility policy, and Neil again will go through some of what we're doing. We think about mobility, I think, fundamentally different than other people think about mobility. We get lots of people selling us mobile device management products, but foundationally, MDM products you see are applying old think to new tech. So we came from a Wintel world where you stig everything, and since everything was mostly the same, that worked, right? The technology didn't change as rapidly. When you move to the mobility world, it's going to be a much more diverse market that you have to support from an operating system perspective, and it moves faster. The global economy is much faster paced than government. I know that's surprising to many of you, but we can't keep pace, right? So we'll do one of 2 things without moving to a mobile data management plan. We will either take your personal device that you want to use and we'll turn it into the device you don't want. We'll disable every feature you love, we'll take all your apps off, and we'll make it a brick and say, aren't you happy now? No, not really. Or we'll do it the other way. We'll say, great, you want, let's say, an iPad 2. We'll say, we're going to get right on that. And in 2016, we will approve your iPad 2. At that point, you will want an iPad 8, right? So we're not fast enough. We can't do it. We have to move to mobile data management with a risk management framework if we're going to pursue mobility. All that comes together to vForce 21. This is in-game. When you put all this stuff together, you enable a virtual workforce for the 21st century. Work is something you do, not somewhere you go. Your office should be wherever your laptop is. You ought to be able to work mostly from anywhere. Because of what we do, there's some security stuff where that's never going to be true. But there's a whole slew of workers who can work from wherever they're at. It's just reality. The tech is there. The people process side has to change. And some of the more astute people in here might notice the fact that I'm a Tennessee boy. Okay, I've got a really subtle accent, but if you pay attention, you can pick it up. But I've spent a minute in D.C. Your commute system here is not the most efficient. Kindly, right? I don't think most people would mind not having to commute to work every day, especially here, right? So that's something that's foundationally different. I think that's something everybody can get behind. There's nobody who's pro-DC commute. Nobody, right? So if you start with the low-hanging fruit, you can get everybody behind that kind of vision, right? So that's our end game. We're also looking at the macro picture of where the government's going. Digital government strategy. As we put all this stuff together in one place, there's no reason we can't anonymize that and expose it where it makes sense. so that the private sector can innovate around those data sets. We spend a lot of money accumulating it. In areas where it makes sense, we ought to turn it over and take advantage of that innovation. You get a smarter government, and we don't have to pay for it. That's win-win. On the wireless side, our investments will enable that work anywhere, anytime, from any device ecosystem, positioning us well for the future. And everything in the end of the day, in this sort of, when you get to the cloud, is all going to be about the APIs. It's going to be service enabling those data sets, that underlying infrastructure, so that not only can we expose it internally so that others can innovate on it, but exposing it externally where it makes sense, around open science, around energy efficiency, around these expensive data sets, the government, that your tax dollars collected, giving them back to you to do innovative things with. So the conclusion here is really we're attacking this on all fronts. It's an all-in strategy across every domain. We're not going to do the cloud in year 1, 2, 3, and then we'll think about mobile in year 4, 5, 6. We're all in right away, year 1. We are building out that toolbox. So all these things have to be done concurrently. You can't just have 1 or 2 pieces and really solve these foundational type of societal problems that Bob talked about. You got to have them all. And I think by working together, industry, our national labs, the federal government, bringing really the best of each together and working together, we can create a smarter government. We can give the taxpayers the government they deserve, the efficient government they deserve. So we think it's an exciting time. I definitely feel privileged to be associated with RightPath, and in particular the NNSA, and be able to be on the edge of some of this. So that's really the conclusion of my presentation, and thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take a few questions.
Organization's reaction to these activities?
It depends on who you ask. So, I mean, there's that full spectrum of what you would expect. There's probably 10 or 15% of people who have never been this excited in their life. I fall into that camp. There's about, 70% of people who just want to figure out what it is you're asking them to do different, make it less scary for them, and they want to continue to get their check. Just don't move my cheese too far. But they're going to get on board. They're not going to actively oppose. It's just, you got to work with them a little. And I think there's probably 15% of folks who are actively plotting my downfall. Right? So it just is what it is. It's part of organizational change and leadership. You just got to be aware of it. Identify who are the key people to work on. Flip the ones you can. Try to get them on your side. Marginalize the ones you can't. It's just part of transformational change. But I think you would find in general, I think people are behind it. I will say at the executive level, at the head of the agency level, we have the most committed executive set to what we're doing that you can imagine.
Thank you.
Others? Yes, sir.
What's your biggest challenge? You've got all these things going. Travis, you talked about doing all these things concurrently. Mm-hmm. What's your biggest challenge from a technical perspective of integrating all these things? And secondly, what's the time frame when vForce 21 is completed or achieved in your mind?
I think 2 parts to that. One is I think integrating the technical side is not that hard. I think we have really good technical folks who figure that stuff out. Not to trivialize it, but we have just surrounded ourselves by the best and brightest in the world, led by Neil. I mean, we have that kind of down, and we've got great industry partners that we've lined up who know how to do this stuff. We're just putting it together in what I think is an interesting way. I don't think we're really inventing a whole lot of tech in most of these. We're just combining them in new and interesting ways. The problem is integrating that with everything else. Integrating it with the budget. Integrating it with procurement. Integrating it with cybersecurity. Integrating it with policy. Keeping all those moving pieces of that bureaucratic maze you saw at the top in lockstep going forward, that's the challenge. I think most of this you see is sort of short-term, mid-term, long-term. So short-term is build the infrastructure. Midterm is kind of consolidate, move to that shared services model, get more efficient, enable new application scenarios. Longer term is that foundational culture change, the infrastructure reduction in our buildings, the change in the way we train, hire, and build managers is a longer term piece that really enables V-Force 21. So I think there's that spectrum of transformational change that will occur over time. Right now, we're just kind of setting the base for it.
Travis, my question's about your cloud. As we know, a lot of the agencies have been trying to implement various forms of cloud, and it's been sort of mixed results. I know. So, it's obvious that this is the crux of the keystone of your approach, and nothing to disagree with on that. How are you coming along in terms of what are the challenges you're facing in trying to adapt a real viable cloud?
Okay, so there's a couple things, just in lessons learned space, I would say, where you look at failure modes and say, well, I'm not going to be that guy. So you see people do things where they go and spend massive amounts of money building a greenfield infrastructure. Okay? One, we don't have money for that. It's not the right thing to do. We got a whole bunch of existing infrastructure we ought to take advantage of. Right? And so they build a whole greenfield thing and say, if we build it, they will come, and nobody comes, then you look dumb. That's not a good way to go. So having a strategy and a vision that you architect around so it's not about the tech is one. Two is that compliance mindset where they say, all right, OMB wants you to go to the cloud. So I moved a workload to EC2 in my DMZ, and so now we're all in on cloud. Not so much, right? And then the third one is you have to really understand and internalize what this tech means for you. So if you talk cloud, there's a lot of use cases around it. But taking a generally good technology without a specific reason to do it is a bad idea. So what we've spent a lot of time doing is strategy over the last year, saying what does cloud mean to us? What does mobility mean to us? How do you put it together with the broader organizational goals and enable that? Because what we want to do is enable them. This should largely be invisible to non-IT folks. It should just happen, and they should say, well, that was cheaper than it was last time. And how did I get that so fast? The underlying, they shouldn't really even care, right? So, and the final piece is you have to have in government an everybody gets a trophy approach. So if you're building this in a way that says, we've got the answer, we're the smartest people, and now everybody's IT organization works for me, that's a fail. Won't work. So what we've done is we've actually invented a broker tech. Again, back to that travel analogy. That lets us overlay on top, support all the different environments with a common architecture from a security and capability perspective on top of it, while celebrating our diversity and that innovation underneath. So I think those sorts of things, when you combine them together, is why I think our success story, I hope, will be different than some of the others you might read about.
Good morning, Travis. Kevin Thomas here at Thorn Point Consulting. Thanks for your transparency. It's been very enlightening. I had a question about, we think about taking classified on the road or allowing staff to do classified work at home, and I realized other agencies have done that. But particularly in the nuclear arena, you mentioned the longer term for the declassification. What's the position, the risk acceptance position of Energy kind of on some of the issues with that regarding classified being mobile?
Okay, so my position is no qualified with a hell no. No work from home classified. So in my mind, what we do, back to my earlier comment, our information does not declassify. It's not like it's a minor uh-oh if you lose a nuclear weapon design. I'm completely and totally 100% out on work from home classified. What we're talking about is enable that capability in our unclassified side, which is really the majority of our workforce, right? And then when you need to do that stuff, that's where you would keep the physical facilities, the hoteling, that sort of stuff. So I think because of who we are, you'll see a hybrid long-term approach. We can't be a purely virtual organization given what we do. And giving the risk to our information in the long-term, what are really worldwide impacts to failure modes in what we do, that's just not anywhere on our roadmap ever.
Any other questions? Okay, well, this concludes Travis's presentation. Travis, thank you so much. Please accept it. You know, I think most of us in this room know all the innovation, the scientific innovation that's being done in the labs, and it's really amazing sitting back and watching where NNSA and DOE are actually able to bring that knowledge base to practical application. That hasn't always been the case, but I think it's very exciting, and you can see where the benefit is, and we're looking forward to seeing more of that.